They told her she had 30 minutes to disappear, but the helicopters gave her less than 3. Dr. Elena Cross stood in the empty locker room of Riverside Veterans Hospital at 5:47 a.m., methodically packing the pieces of a career she'd spent 7 years rebuilding. Her stethoscope, the expensive Littman with her initials engraved on the bell, a gift to herself after her first year back in civilian medicine. 3 ballpoint pens, 2 black and 1 red, the kind that clicked just right. A small bottle of lavender hand lotion that masked the smell of antiseptic and death, and a photograph of her younger brother in his army dress uniform, Daniel Cross, 22 years old forever, smiling like he believed the world was fair and that sacrifice meant something. The metal locker door still had her nameplate on it, Dr. E. Cross, Trauma RN, but by noon, someone else's name would replace it. Someone who followed protocol. Someone who didn't ask inconvenient questions or make administrators nervous. If you want to hear more stories like this, hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, do it. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? New York? London? São Paulo? I want to know who's out there in the dark with me. 72 hours ago, Elena had saved a woman's life. Margaret Thurlow, Veterans Affairs Inspector, had collapsed in the hospital corridor during a surprise compliance audit. Massive pulmonary embolism, blood clot lodged in her left main pulmonary artery. Her lips had been turning blue. Her oxygen saturation was dropping like a stone. She had maybe 4 minutes before brain damage, maybe 8 before death. Dr. Gerald Kemp, Chief of Medicine, had barked orders over the phone from his home in the suburbs. Stabilize her vitals and wait for the vascular surgeon. Do not improvise. We cannot afford litigation exposure on a federal inspector. But Elena had seen this before. In Kabul. In desert field hospitals, where waiting meant body bags. Where the nearest surgical suite was a helicopter ride away, and the helicopters didn't always come in time. She'd made her decision in 3 seconds. Grabbed a catheter, commandeered the portable fluoroscopy unit from radiology, and used a rotational aspiration technique she'd invented in a trauma tent 8 years ago. A method that combined mechanical thrombectomy with pressure gradient manipulation. It wasn't in any civilian textbook, because she'd developed it under fire, under classified operations, in a war zone that officially never happened. 15 minutes later, she'd extracted the clot. Thurlow's oxygen levels stabilized. Her color returned. She'd walked out of the ICU 3 days later, fully recovered, with her husband crying grateful tears in the hallway. Kemp had called Elena into his office that same afternoon. No congratulations. No acknowledgement. Just a termination letter and a hospital lawyer who spoke in carefully rehearsed sentences about protocol deviation and liability management. You overrode a direct medical order, Kemp had said, not even looking at her. If she'd died, this hospital would be facing a federal wrongful death lawsuit. We're letting you go quietly. Sign the NDA. Leave without making noise. We'll give you a neutral reference. Elena had signed, not because she agreed, because she'd learned 7 years ago that fighting institutions was like punching smoke. They'd bury you and move on. Now, she zipped her duffel bag and slung it over her shoulder. The hospital was silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant beeping of cardiac monitors from the ICU 3 floors up. She walked through the corridor where Thurlow had collapsed. Someone had mopped up the blood from the IV she'd ripped out, past the nurses' station where nobody met her eyes, and pushed through the double doors into the cold Virginia dawn. The air hit her first, sharp, clean, laced with frost that burned her lungs. The parking lot was empty except for a few night shift cars, and the maintenance truck parked crooked near the dumpsters. The sky was that pale gray-blue color that comes just before sunrise, when the world feels suspended between darkness and light. Then she heard it, a low rumble, deep, mechanical, growing louder by the second. Elena stopped on the sidewalk, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The sound wasn't traffic. It wasn't construction. It was a frequency her body recognized before her mind could process it. Rotors, heavy, military grade, coming in fast and low. The kind of sound that meant someone was either being saved or someone was about to die. 2 UH-60 Blackhawks dropped from the pale sky like birds of prey descending on wounded animals. Their rotors tore through the morning quiet, whipping loose gravel and fast food trash across the parking lot in violent spirals. Elena threw up an arm to shield her face as the helicopters touched down 30 feet away, their landing skids scraping asphalt with a metallic shriek that echoed off the hospital walls. The rear doors flew open before the rotors even began to slow. Soldiers poured out. 6 of them, maybe 8, full tactical gear, plate carriers, rifles slung across their chests, moving with the kind of economical precision that comes from training and combat and missions where hesitation gets people killed. They fanned out immediately, scanning faces, searching the handful of stunned hospital workers who'd come outside to see what the hell was happening. Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. Her duffel bag slipped from her shoulder and hit the concrete. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a mistake. One of them locked eyes on her across 30 feet of parking lot. A tall sergeant with a scarred jaw and the kind of 1,000-yard stare that cut through distance and doubt. He started moving toward her with purpose, and that's when Elena saw it. The patch on his shoulder. Faded, worn, colors bleached by sun and sand and years of service. A Reaper's scythe crossed over a red medical cross. Reaper Med Unit. The covert surgical response team she'd served with in Afghanistan. The unit that had been disbanded 7 years ago after Operation Sandstone went catastrophically wrong. The unit that officially no longer existed because the mission had been scrubbed from every record, every file, every database that mattered. The unit that had made her the best combat medic in the U.S. Armed Forces, and then erased her like she'd never existed at all. The sergeant stopped 3 feet in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the dust still clinging to his uniform, the way his hand rested near his sidearm out of habit rather than threat. His voice cut through the rotor noise with absolute authority. "Dr. Elena Cross, you need to come with us, right now." Elena's mouth went dry. She hadn't heard that name, her full designation, her rank, her military identity, in 7 years. She was just a nurse now, just someone who'd been fired for saving a life. Just another civilian trying to forget the things she'd seen and done in places that didn't appear on maps. But Reaper Med didn't show up for nurses. They showed up when someone was dying, and conventional medicine had already failed. When the only options left were the impossible ones. Elena's hands started to shake. Not from fear, from recognition, from muscle memory that lived deeper than thought. "Who's dying?" she heard herself ask. The sergeant's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Respect, maybe. Or relief that she'd already understood. "Someone who needs you," he said. "Someone who's been looking for you for 7 years." The interior of the Black Hawk smelled like hydraulic fluid, sweat, and the metallic tang of weapons recently fired. Elena sat strapped into the jump seat, her hands gripping the harness as the helicopter banked hard left, climbing fast over the Virginia countryside. Through the open door, she watched Riverside Veterans Hospital shrink to a gray rectangle, then disappear entirely behind a ridge of pine trees. Across from her, the scarred sergeant leaned forward, pulling off his tactical gloves. His name tape read, Reyes. Elena's memory snapped into focus. Sergeant Malik Reyes, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to Reaper Med during Operation Sandstone. He'd been the one who'd carried supplies through enemy fire, while she'd performed a thoracotomy in the back of a moving Humvee. "You remember me?" Reyes said. Not a question. "You're hard to forget," Elena replied, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "You saved my life in Kabul. Twice. 3 times, actually." A ghost of a smile. But who's counting? The smile vanished. Reyes pulled a tablet from his vest and turned it toward her. The screen showed a medical scan. CT angiography, high resolution, color-coded for tissue density. Elena's trained eye absorbed the image in seconds. Adult male, chest cavity, and there, near the aortic arch, a cluster of foreign objects glowing white against the soft tissue. Shrapnel. Multiple fragments, lodged in scar tissue. Old scar tissue. Her stomach dropped. "Major General David Hale," Reyes said, his voice flat and professional, the way soldiers talk when they're trying not to feel. IED attack 48 hours ago in an undisclosed theater. Shrapnel penetrated his chest cavity. Surgeons at Landstuhl stabilized him enough for transport, but they can't operate. The fragments are fused to old scar tissue from a previous injury. Removing them risks catastrophic hemorrhage. Leaving them means he bleeds out within 12 hours. Elena stared at the scan. Her hands had gone cold. David Hale. Lieutenant Colonel Hale back then. Her commanding officer during Operation Sandstone. The man who'd trusted her when she was a 26-year-old combat medic with more instinct than experience. The man who'd been dying in a field hospital outside Kandahar when an RPG had shredded the arterial wall near his heart, and every surgeon had said it was impossible, that he needed a level 1 trauma center, that field medicine couldn't save him. Elena had saved him anyway. She'd used clamps and surgical mesh, and a bypass technique she'd improvised on the spot, routing blood flow around the damaged artery using a temporary shunt, anchored with sutures that shouldn't have held but did. She'd called it the cross shunt, because she didn't have time to think of anything better. Hale had lived. He'd walked out of that field hospital 6 weeks later, and then the Army had buried the whole operation, classified the mission, discharged her under a gag order after she'd tried to report the faulty body armor that had killed 3 of her medics. The cross shunt, Elena said quietly, staring at the scan. That's what I'm looking at, isn't it? The old repair. Reyes nodded. The shrapnel is embedded in the scar tissue from your original procedure. They need someone who understands the anatomy, someone who knows how it was built. Elena looked up sharply. They? Fort Ashford Forward Surgical Unit. Black Site Facility. Treats high-clearance casualties, generals, intelligence assets, operators whose names don't appear on any roster. Reyes paused. General Hale specifically requested you. He's been looking for you for 7 years. 7 years. The same amount of time she'd spent rebuilding a civilian life, working in ERs and VA hospitals under a cloud of whispers and redacted service records, wondering if Hale even remembered her name. There's something else you need to know, Reyes continued. He swiped to another file on the tablet. A medical journal article, published 3 years ago in the Journal of Military Medicine. The title read, The Hale Maneuver, a novel approach to combat arterial trauma. Elena's breath caught. She skimmed the abstract. The technique described was hers. Every step, every detail, every improvisation she'd made in that desert field hospital. But the authors listed were military surgeons she'd never heard of. Hale's name appeared only as the index patient. Her name didn't appear at all. It's taught now, Reyes said. At Fort Sam Houston, at the Navy's Medical Training Center in San Diego, in field manuals distributed to special operations medics worldwide. He met her eyes. The cross shunt saved Hale, and then it saved 247 other people. But they don't call it the cross shunt anymore. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not anger. Worse. The cold, hollow confirmation that everything she'd suspected was true. They erased me, she said. Command erased you, Reyes corrected. Hale didn't. He's been fighting to get your name restored since the day you were discharged. They threatened him with court-martial if he went public. The helicopter began to descend. Elena looked out the door and saw it. A sprawling compound hidden in dense forest, ringed by fences and guard towers that didn't appear on any map. Concrete buildings with reinforced blast doors. A helipad marked with subdued lighting. Fort Ashford. The Black Hawk touched down with a jolt. The rotors began to slow. Reyes unbuckled and stood. He's in surgery now. They've been trying for 6 hours. They're out of options. Elena followed him down the ramp onto the tarmac. The air here was colder, sharper, carrying the faint smell of pine and aviation fuel. Soldiers in unmarked fatigues moved with purpose across the compound. No one stopped. No one stared. This was a place where impossible things happened quietly. And then she saw them. 2 figures standing near the entrance to the main surgical building. Waiting. Watching. Dr. Sonia Park. Slight, intense, black hair pulled back in a tight bun. Brilliant vascular surgeon who'd worked miracles in field hospitals from Mosul to Jalalabad. And Corpsman Luis Navarro. Broad-shouldered, steady hands, the kind of medic who could start an IV in a sandstorm while under mortar fire. Reaper Med. Her old team. The people who'd thought she'd vanished 7 years ago. Park's expression broke first. She stepped forward, and Elena saw tears streaking down her face. "We thought you were dead," Park said, her voice cracking. "We thought they'd—" "I'm here," Elena interrupted, because there wasn't time for explanations or reunions or the wait of 7 years. "Where's Hale?" Navarro gestured toward the building. "Operating room 3. Dr. Albrecht is lead surgeon, but he's hit a wall. Hale's crashing. They're barely keeping him alive." Elena didn't wait for more. She started moving toward the doors, muscle memory taking over, her mind already shifting into the cold, focused state she'd learned in war zones. Behind her, Park called out, "Elena, the technique you used to save him before, it won't work this time. This is different. Worse." Elena stopped at the entrance and looked back. Park was right. She could see it in the scans Reyes had shown her. This wasn't the same injury. The old repair had held for 7 years, but now it was failing, and the new trauma was compounded on top of scar tissue and time, and the 1,000 small ways the body compensates for damage until it can't anymore. She'd have to invent something new, in real time, with no margin for error. "I know," Elena said. Then she pushed through the doors into the surgical wing, where someone who'd once saved her career was dying because she'd saved his life. Operating room 3 smelled like blood and desperation. Elena pushed through the double doors into a space that looked more like a battlefield trauma bay than a modern surgical suite. Portable monitors lined the walls, their screens showing vital signs that made her stomach drop. Blood pressure 80/50, and falling, heart rate erratic, oxygen saturation hovering at 88%. Too low. All of it too low. In the center of the room, under harsh surgical lights, Major General David Hale lay on the operating table with his chest already opened. 4 surgeons in blood-splattered gowns surrounded him, their hands moving with the careful precision of people who knew they were losing but refused to stop trying. Dr. Raymond Albrecht, the lead surgeon, looked up as Elena entered. His face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes carrying the particular kind of defeat that comes from being very good at something and still not being good enough. "Dr. Cross," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank God. We've been holding him for 6 hours. We can't hold him much longer." Elena moved to the scrub sink, her hands already going through the motions. Soap, water, the ritualized cleansing that separated the outside world from the sterile precision of surgery. Through the observation window, she could see Park and Navarro scrubbing in beside her, their faces set with the same grim determination she felt building in her chest. "Talk to me," Elena said, as she dried her hands. "What have you attempted?" Albrecht gestured to the open chest cavity, and Elena stepped closer to see. The damage was worse than the scans had suggested. The shrapnel, 3 jagged fragments of metal, were embedded directly in the scar tissue from the cross-shunt she'd performed 7 years ago. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the old repair had been compromised by the new trauma. The arterial wall was paper-thin in places, held together by scar tissue that had stretched and weakened over time. "Standard extraction protocols will rupture the artery," Albrecht continued. "We tried proximal and distal control, but the tissue is too fragile. We can't clamp without causing more damage. We attempted endovascular stenting, but the angle is wrong. The shrapnel blocks access. Every option we've explored leads to the same conclusion: catastrophic hemorrhage." Elena leaned over the operating table, her eyes tracing the architecture of blood vessels and damaged tissue. Her mind began working through possibilities, discarding them as fast as they formed. This wasn't like cobble. This wasn't a fresh injury that could be bypassed or repaired using conventional techniques, even improvised ones. This was something entirely new, a complication of her own success. The shrapnel had lodged itself in the exact location where she'd saved Hale's life 7 years ago, and now removing it might undo everything she'd done. Behind her, Park spoke quietly. "Elena, if you can't do this, no one will blame you. This is impossible." "Impossible just means no one's figured it out yet," Elena replied, the words coming automatically, something her brother Daniel used to say before every mission. A monitor began alarming. Hale's blood pressure was dropping again. One of the assisting surgeons called out numbers that sounded like a countdown to death. And then Hale's eyes opened. He shouldn't have been conscious. The anesthesia alone should have kept him under. But pain and sheer stubborn will had dragged him back to the surface, and his gaze found Elena's face across the operating table. "You came," he whispered, his voice so faint she almost missed it over the sound of machines. "I knew you would." "Don't talk," Elena said, but Hale shook his head fractionally. 7 years. Tried to find you. Tried to make them. His words dissolved into a grimace of pain. "I know," Elena said, and meant it. "Now let me save you again." Hale's eyes closed, and Elena felt the weight of 7 years settle onto her shoulders. The betrayal, the erasure, the 247 lives saved using her technique without her name attached. All of it led to this moment, a man dying on a table because she'd once been brilliant enough to save him. She turned to Albrecht. "I need detailed imaging of the arterial structure, every angle. And I need someone who can think 3 steps ahead because what I'm about to do doesn't exist in any manual." Park stepped forward. "You have me." Navarro followed. "And me." Elena pulled on surgical gloves, feeling them snap against her wrists with satisfying finality. Her mind had already made the leap to the solution, a dual anchor bypass using graft tissue to create a new pathway around both the old repair and the new damage. She'd route blood flow through a temporary channel while she removed the shrapnel, then reconstruct the artery using a layered repair that would distribute pressure across multiple anchor points. It was insane. It violated 3 fundamental principles of vascular surgery, and it was the only thing that might work. "We're calling it the Hale Cross Protocol," Elena said as she positioned herself at the table. "Because if this works, both our names go on it." Albrecht stepped back, giving her space. "The room is yours, Dr. Cross." Elena's hands moved to Hale's chest, and everything else disappeared. The politics, the erasure, the 7 years of anger and grief. There was only the work, only the impossible problem that needed solving, only the life that depended on her being exactly as good as she'd always known she was. "Let's begin." Elena's hands moved with surgical precision, her fingers navigating the damaged arterial wall like she was defusing a bomb. Because in a way, she was. One wrong move, 1 millimeter of miscalculation, and Major General David Hale would bleed out in seconds. Park stood at her right shoulder, anticipating instruments before Elena could ask. Navarro monitored vitals from across the table, his voice steady as he called out numbers that told a story Elena didn't want to hear. BP dropping. 75/45. Elena didn't respond. She was creating the first anchor point for the bypass graft, a delicate attachment that would bear the full force of arterial blood flow once she rerouted circulation away from the damaged section. The tissue was fragile, weakened by 7 years of compensating for trauma it was never designed to survive. She'd already harvested graft material from Hale's saphenous vein, preparing it for the dual pathway bypass that existed only in her mind. The theory was sound. The execution required perfection. "Heart rate 125 and climbing," Navarro called out. Elena placed the first suture, then the second. Each one had to be precise, tight enough to hold under pressure, loose enough not to tear through tissue that felt like wet paper. Then the monitor screamed, not the steady alarm of declining vitals, the sustained, shrill cry that meant cardiac arrest. "He's crashing," Navarro shouted, already moving. Elena's head snapped up. The monitor showed a flat line where Hale's heartbeat should have been. His blood pressure had plummeted to 0. The surgical field, his open chest, suddenly looked like a still life painting. No movement, no pulse, no life. 90 seconds, Albrecht said, his voice cutting through the chaos. That's all we have before brain damage starts. Elena's mind split into 2 tracks. One part stayed ice cold, analytical, running through protocols and possibilities. The other part, the part that remembered Hale as the commanding officer who'd trusted a young medic's crazy ideas, felt panic clawing at her throat. She pushed it down. "Park, get me the internal defibrillator paddles. Navarro, start chest compressions. Gentle. We have an open chest cavity." Her hands never stopped moving. She couldn't stop the bypass procedure completely, couldn't abandon the surgical field, or they'd lose any chance of saving him if they got his heart started again. Park placed the paddles into Elena's blood-slicked gloves. These weren't the external paddles used in emergency rooms. These were smaller, designed to deliver shock directly to the heart muscle. More effective, also more dangerous. Charging to 20 joules, Elena said. Clear. Navarro pulled back. Elena positioned the paddles on either side of Hale's heart and delivered the shock. His body jerked slightly. The monitor stayed flat. Again. 30 joules. Clear. Another shock. This time, a single blip appeared on the monitor, then disappeared. He's in V-fib, Park said, her voice tight. His heart's trying. Elena's internal clock was counting down. 60 seconds since cardiac arrest. 30 seconds until irreversible damage began. She had one more chance. 50 joules. Maximum safe dose. Clear. The shock jolted through Hale's body. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the monitor beeped. Once. Twice. A rhythm began to emerge. Irregular, weak, but present. We have sinus rhythm, Navarro breathed. BP coming up. 60/40. Still critical but climbing. Elena set down the paddles, her hands shaking now with released adrenaline. But she couldn't stop, couldn't pause to process what had just happened. She returned to the bypass graft, picking up exactly where she'd left off, as if the last 90 seconds had been a brief interruption, rather than a brush with death. Someone tell me why he crashed, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Albrecht was already pulling up lab results on a nearby monitor. His face went gray. White blood cell count is elevated. Temperature rising. Signs of systemic infection. He looked at Elena. The original shrapnel from 7 years ago. It's been causing chronic low-grade sepsis. His body's been fighting an infection for years, and the new trauma pushed him into septic shock. Elena felt ice spread through her chest. This wasn't just a surgical problem anymore. Hale was dying from the inside out. His immune system overwhelmed by an infection that had been festering since Kabul. His vitals are deteriorating faster than they should be, Navarro confirmed, watching the monitors. Even with the bypass, if we can't control the infection, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Albrecht moved closer to Elena, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. Dr. Cross, you need to understand something. This facility exists in a gray area. If Hale dies during this procedure, there will be an investigation. They'll shut us down. The medical innovations we've developed here, the lives we've saved treating cases too sensitive for conventional hospitals, all of it goes away. He paused, and Elena could feel the weight of what he was about to say. But that's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because if you succeed, if you save him, they'll never let you go. You'll become indispensable. They'll ask you to do this again and again. Every impossible case. Every dying general or intelligence asset. You'll spend the rest of your life saving people in secret, with no recognition, no credit, no life of your own. Elena's hands continued their precise work, placing sutures with mechanical perfection. Are you ready for that? Albrecht asked quietly. Elena thought about the hospital that had fired her. About 7 years of being erased. About 247 lives saved using her technique without her name attached. About the choice that wasn't really a choice. Walk away and let Hale die, or step back into a world that would use her brilliance and bury her existence. She placed the final suture on the first anchor point and looked up at Albrecht. Ask me again when he's alive, she said. Then she returned to the impossible work of saving a man who'd spent 7 years trying to save her. Elena's hands worked with mechanical precision, placing sutures that would anchor the dual bypass graft to Hale's damaged artery. 2 hours into the surgery, her fingers moved almost independently from her conscious mind, muscle memory taking over while her brain calculated angles, pressures, and the 1,000 small variables that separated success from catastrophic failure. Park handed her another length of graft material without being asked. Navarro called out vitals that were holding steady. Barely. The infection was spreading. But Elena had bought them time with aggressive antibiotic protocols, and careful debridement of necrotic tissue around the old shrapnel wounds. The operating room door opened with a soft hiss. Sergeant Reyes entered, still in his tactical gear, carrying a weathered leather briefcase that looked like it had survived multiple deployments. He approached the table carefully, staying out of the sterile field. "Dr. Cross," he said quietly, "there's something you need to see. General Hale asked me to show you if—" He stopped himself. "He wanted you to know the truth." "I'm in the middle of surgery," Elena replied, without looking up. "I know. But this can't wait." Reyes opened the briefcase and pulled out a manila folder marked with red classification stamps. "This is the original Operation Sandstone After Action report, the one that was buried 7 years ago." Elena's hands paused for a fraction of a second. Park noticed, her eyes darting between Elena and Reyes. "Keep going," Park said softly. "I'll assist. You can listen." Elena resumed her work as Reyes opened the folder. His voice was steady, professional, but she could hear the anger underneath. "The report details the ambush in Kabul, the faulty body armor that failed to stop small arms fire, the 3 medics who died because procurement cut corners to save budget." He paused. "And it documents your emergency procedure, the cross shunt, in detail. Every step, every innovation. With full attribution to combat medic specialist Elena Cross." Elena's jaw tightened. She placed another suture, then another. "Hale never buried you," Reyes continued. "Command did. They classified the entire operation to cover up the armor failure. Your technique was extracted from the report, sanitized, and redistributed through training programs without your name attached. Hale fought them, threatened to go public. They told him if he didn't stand down, he'd face court-martial for disclosing classified information. So he protected his career," Elena said, her voice flat. "No, he protected yours. If he'd been court-martialed, they would have claimed you were complicit. You would have faced federal charges. Hale took the NDA and spent 7 years working inside the system trying to find another way." Reyes pulled out another document, a spreadsheet with rows of data. "He's been tracking every life saved using the cross shunt. 247 confirmed cases across 4 continents. Field medics in Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, emergency rooms in Detroit and Chicago. Every single one traces back to your innovation." Elena felt something crack in her chest. 247 people alive because she'd refused to let Hale die in a desert field hospital. 247 families who didn't get the worst phone call, and none of them knew her name. "There's more," Reyes said, his voice dropping. "A second name appears in the classified sections of this file. Dr. Gerald Kemp." Elena's hands stopped moving. Park stepped in immediately, taking over the critical suture placement while Elena looked up at Reyes. "Kemp was a Pentagon medical consultant during Operation Sandstone," Reyes explained. "He was the one who recommended burying the mission, who pushed for your discharge, who argued that acknowledging the armor failure would damage military recruitment and morale. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Kemp hadn't fired her from Riverside Veterans Hospital because she'd violated protocol. He'd fired her because she was evidence of a cover-up he'd helped orchestrate. She was a loose end, a threat to his carefully constructed career built on lies and buried bodies. He's been sabotaging you for 7 years, Reyes said. Every job application flagged. Every reference checked through back channels. He made sure you stayed invisible. Elena took a slow breath, forcing her hands to steady as she resumed her work on Hale's bypass graft. The anger was there, hot and righteous and threatening to consume her. But she pushed it down into a place where it could fuel her focus instead of destroying it. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Reyes closed the folder. "Because General Hale said if you're going to save his life again, you deserve to know what it cost him the first time, and what it's going to cost you if you succeed." Elena placed the final anchor suture on the bypass graft. The procedure was working. Blood was flowing through the new pathway, bypassing the damaged tissue. Hale's vitals were stabilizing. She'd done it. Against impossible odds, against tissue that shouldn't have held, against infection and time, and the weight of 7 years of betrayal. She'd invented another miracle. and now she understood that miracles came with a price she was only beginning to calculate. The shrapnel extraction was the most delicate part of the procedure. Elena had stabilized the bypass graft, rerouted blood flow through the dual pathway system she'd invented, and carefully isolated the 3 fragments of metal that had been killing Major General David Hale from the inside out for 7 years. Her forceps closed around the first fragment, a jagged piece of steel no bigger than a grain of rice, but sharp enough to slice through arterial walls like a scalpel. She lifted it slowly, steadily, feeling the resistance of scar tissue that had grown around the metal like a prison. "First fragment clear," Park announced, placing it in a surgical tray. Elena moved to the second piece. This one was deeper, lodged in tissue that had fused to the original cross-shunt repair. Every millimeter of movement risked tearing through the bypass graft she'd just created. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She'd performed impossible procedures in desert field hospitals under mortar fire. This was just another impossible problem that needed solving. The second fragment came free. Then every monitor in the operating room started screaming at once. "He's crashing!" Navarro shouted. "No pulse, no BP, flatline." But this time was different. This wasn't the brief cardiac arrest from earlier. Hale's heart had stopped completely. Not fibrillating, not struggling, just stopped. The monitor showed a perfectly flat line that seemed to stretch into eternity. Open cardiac massage. Now. Elena's hands were already moving, positioning herself to perform direct compressions on Hale's exposed heart. She pressed down with both hands, feeling the muscle beneath her palms, warm, soft, lifeless. She compressed in rhythm, manually pumping blood through his body because his heart had forgotten how. "Park, internal paddles. Charge to 20 joules. Park placed the paddles in Elena's blood-slicked hands. Clear. The shock jolted through Hale's heart muscle. Nothing. 40 joules. Clear. Another shock. The monitor stayed flat. Elena felt time compressing around her. 90 seconds without circulation. Brain cells were dying. Organs were failing. Every second that passed reduced the chances of meaningful recovery. 60 joules. Clear. The third shock. Still nothing. Albrecht stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Doctor, Cross, we've exceeded protocol. We need to call it." "No." Elena's voice was absolute. She handed the paddles back to Park and grabbed a syringe. "I need 1 cc of epinephrine. Concentrated." Navarro's eyes widened. "Elena, you're not thinking..." "Intracardiac injection, direct to the aorta." She was already positioning the needle, finding the angle through scar tissue and graft material. "That technique is banned in civilian medicine," Albrecht said, but he didn't move to stop her. "The risk of cardiac rupture is less than the certainty of death if we do nothing." Elena found the injection site. "I saw this done once in Kandahar. It worked." She didn't wait for permission. The needle pierced tissue, found the aortic wall, and delivered epinephrine directly into Hale's circulatory system. For 3 eternal seconds, nothing happened. Then the monitor beeped. Once. Twice. A rhythm began to emerge. Weak, irregular, but undeniably present. "We have sinus rhythm," Navarro breathed, his voice shaking. "BP 65/40, climbing." Elena pulled out the needle and returned to the surgical field. Her hands were shaking now, fine tremors from adrenaline and exhaustion, but she forced them steady. She had 1 fragment left to extract, and Hale's window of stability was closing fast. The final piece of shrapnel came free 5 minutes later. Elena placed it in the tray beside its companions. 3 pieces of metal that had traveled through war zones and decades, that had nearly killed a man twice, that had defined the boundaries of what was medically possible, and then demanded someone cross them. She closed the surgical site using techniques that combined battlefield medicine with innovations she was inventing in real time. Layer by layer, suture by suture, she rebuilt what trauma and time had destroyed. 2 hours later, Hale was stable. The monitors showed vitals that weren't perfect, but were alive. Heartbeat steady, blood pressure holding, oxygen saturation climbing toward normal. The surgical team stood in exhausted silence, processing what they'd witnessed. Navarro was wiping tears from his eyes. Park had her hand over her mouth. Even Albrecht looked shaken. He approached Elena as she removed her surgical gloves. "Dr. Cross, what you just did, I've never seen anything like it. We need to document this, for training purposes, for the medics who'll face this situation next time." He paused. "What do we call it?" Elena looked at Hale, at the man who'd spent 7 years trying to restore her name, while she'd spent 7 years trying to forget his. At the general who'd protected her career at the cost of his own advancement. At the person who'd believed in a young combat medic's crazy ideas when no one else would. "The Hale Cross Protocol," she said quietly. "Both our names. He earned it." Elena stood in the recovery room watching Major General David Hale sleep. His chest rose and fell with steady, mechanical precision, the rhythm of someone who'd been pulled back from death and was still learning how to be alive again. Monitors beeped softly, displaying vitals that would have been impossible 6 hours ago. She'd done it. Against every protocol, every statistical probability, every limitation that conventional medicine had accepted as absolute. She'd saved him, and now she was about to find out what that would cost her. The door opened behind her. Sergeant Reyes entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Dr. Cross, Brigadier General Tran needs to see you immediately. Secure briefing room on the 3rd floor." Elena didn't turn around. "Who is Brigadier General Tran?" "Head of Defense Medical Command. She oversees all military medical innovation and training programs worldwide." Reyes paused. "She's been watching the surgery remotely. She wants to talk to you about your future." Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Of course they'd been watching. Of course someone in command had been documenting every moment of the Hale Cross Protocol. Miracles didn't happen in military facilities without someone calculating how to weaponize them. The briefing room was small, windowless, designed for conversations that would never appear in official records. A large table dominated the center, flanked by chairs that had seen countless difficult negotiations. And at the head of the table sat Brigadier General Lydia Tran. Early 50s, sharp eyes, uniform pressed with parade ground precision. "Dr. Cross, please sit." It wasn't a request. Elena sat. Tran studied her for a long moment, the way a chess player studies the board before a decisive move. "What you did today was extraordinary. The Hale Cross Protocol will save hundreds of lives, maybe thousands. You've proven that you're not just competent, you're irreplaceable." Tran opened a folder. "We're offering you full reinstatement. Rank of Lieutenant Colonel, backdated to your discharge 7 years ago. That's $400,000 in back pay. Position as Chief of Surgical Innovation at Defense Medical Command. You'll develop protocols, train the next generation of combat medics, and ensure that innovations like yours reach the field where they're needed most." It was everything Elena had lost. Everything she'd spent 7 years grieving. Her rank, her career, her purpose. "What's the catch?" Elena asked quietly. Tran's expression didn't change. "You'll sign a new non-disclosure agreement. The Operation Sandstone cover-up remains classified. Dr. Gerald Kemp's involvement in the armor procurement scandal stays buried. You'll let us manage the narrative around your reinstatement. Frame it as a recruitment opportunity, a story about second chances and military innovation." Elena felt her jaw tighten. "You want me to save lives in silence while you protect the people who got my team killed, while you let Kemp continue sabotaging careers and covering up his corruption. I want you to be pragmatic," Tran replied, her voice calm. "You can fight the system and accomplish nothing, or you can work within it and save countless lives. Which matters more, your need for public vindication or your ability to do the work you were born to do?" Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I refuse." Tran didn't flinch. "If you walk away, General Hale's medical records remain classified. The Hale Cross Protocol dies in this facility. You'll have saved one man and helped no one else. Every soldier who bleeds out in the next decade because field medics don't have access to your technique, that's on you." The words landed like physical blows. Elena felt the trap closing around her with surgical precision, except the system that had erased her, that had protected corruption at the cost of soldiers' lives, that would use her brilliance and bury her name again. Or walk away and let her innovations die with her, condemning future casualties to deaths that could have been prevented. "You're blackmailing me," Elena said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm offering you a choice," Tran corrected. "Power without recognition, or principles without impact. You have 24 hours to decide." Elena walked back to the recovery room, her mind spinning with Tran's ultimatum. 24 hours to choose between power and principle, between saving lives in silence or watching her innovations die with her career. But when she pushed through the door, she found Major General David Hale awake. He looked terrible, gray-faced, weak, connected to monitors and IV lines that kept him tethered to life. But his eyes were clear, alert, tracking her movement across the room. "You look like hell," Elena said, pulling up a chair beside his bed. Hale's mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile. "You should see the other guy." His voice was raspy, damaged from intubation. "How long was I out?" 8 hours since surgery. "You crashed twice on the table. Technically died once." Elena met his gaze. "I brought you back." "I know. I could feel you fighting for me." Hale shifted slightly, wincing. "They made you an offer, didn't they?" Tran came with the reinstatement package and the new NDA. Elena's jaw tightened. "How did you know?" "Because it's the same deal they offered me 7 years ago. Take the promotion, keep your mouth shut, let them manage the narrative." Hale's expression hardened. "I took it. Thought I could change things from the inside. Spent 7 years trying to find you, trying to get your name restored through official channels. All I did was give them time to bury the evidence deeper." He reached for something on the bedside table, a small USB drive on a lanyard. His hands shook with the effort. "Take this," he said. Elena took the drive. It was warm from Hale's grip. "What is it?" "Everything. Every life saved using the cross shunt. Every training program that teaches your technique without your name. Every document that proves Kemp orchestrated the cover-up to protect his Pentagon consulting contracts. Every lie they told to erase you." Hale's voice grew stronger, fueled by anger that had been simmering for 7 years. "I couldn't go public with it. I was bound by the NDA, by my rank, by the chain of command. But you're not active duty anymore. You're a civilian. You have options I never had." Elena stared at the drive. "If I use this, I violate the original NDA. They'll come after me. Court-martial, federal charges, they'll destroy me. Only if you do it quietly." Hale grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "Senator Adrienne Booker, chair of the Senate Armed Services Committee. She's been investigating military medical corruption for 3 years. I leaked parts of the Sandstone file to her office years ago, but it got buried in bureaucracy. She needs a witness, someone with first-hand knowledge who's willing to testify publicly." Elena felt her heart hammering. Public testimony means congressional hearings, media coverage, no way to suppress it. Exactly. They can't court-martial you if the entire country is watching. They can't bury you if your name is already public. Hale's eyes burned with intensity. "Make them see you, Elena. I couldn't. But you can. You have the proof, the credibility, and the platform. Use it." Elena looked at the USB drive, feeling its weight far exceeded its physical mass. This wasn't just evidence. It was a bomb that would detonate 7 years of carefully constructed lies. "If I do this, there's no going back," she said quietly. "There was no going back the moment you saved my life in Kabul," Hale replied. "You were always too good, too brilliant, too inconvenient for them to ignore. The only question is whether you let them use you in silence or force them to acknowledge you in the light." Elena closed her fist around the drive. Then she pulled out her phone and searched for Senator Booker's office contact information. The call connected on the second ring. A professional voice answered, "Senator Booker's office." "My name is Dr. Elena Cross," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I have evidence of a military medical cover-up that resulted in deaths from faulty equipment and systematic erasure of whistleblowers. I'm willing to testify publicly if the senator will guarantee me a platform." There was a pause. Then, "Please hold." Elena waited, watching Hale's face. He nodded once. Approval, respect, relief. 30 seconds later, a new voice came on the line. Older, female, carrying unmistakable authority. "Dr. Cross, This is Senator Adrienne Booker. I've been waiting 7 years for this call. The Senate Armed Services Committee hearing room felt like a courtroom designed for judgment. Mahogany panels lined the walls, American flags flanked the raised dais where senators sat like judges, and cameras, officially banned but strategically positioned for internal Pentagon streaming, recorded everything. Elena sat at the witness table, a microphone in front of her, and the USB drive connected to a laptop that would display evidence on screens throughout the room. Her hands were steady now. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. Senator Adrienne Booker, mid-60s, steel-gray hair, eyes that had seen decades of political warfare, gavelled the closed hearing to order. Dr. Elena Cross, you've provided this committee with allegations of systemic corruption within military medical procurement and personnel management. You understand that your testimony today may violate non-disclosure agreements you signed upon discharge. I understand, Senator, Elena replied, her voice clear. I also understand that NDAs cannot legally be used to cover up criminal activity or threats to national security. The faulty body armor that killed 3 of my medics falls into both categories. Murmurs rippled through the room. Elena saw Pentagon officials in the gallery exchanging urgent glances. And there, seated in the back row with a lawyer beside him, was Dr. Gerald Kemp. His face was carefully neutral, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair with white-knuckled intensity. Booker leaned forward. Present your evidence, Dr. Cross. Elena clicked to the first slide. Operation Sandstone, Kabul, 2018. My unit, Reaper Med, was sent to extract a high-value intelligence asset. We were equipped with Level 3 body armor that procurement records show was approved by consultant Dr. Gerald Kemp despite failing ballistic testing standards. The screen showed procurement documents, test results marked insufficient protection, and Kemp's signature on approval forms. The ambush resulted in 3 combat medics killed when their armor failed to stop small arms fire. Standard armor would have saved them. Elena's voice didn't waver. I filed a report detailing the equipment failure. That report was classified, and I was discharged under an NDA that prevented me from discussing what happened. She clicked to the next slide. The original cross-shunt documentation. During that same operation, I performed an emergency cardiac procedure that saved Major General David Hale's life. I documented the technique in my after-action report. That documentation was extracted, sanitized, and redistributed through military training programs without attribution. The screen showed side-by-side comparisons. Her original report with her name clearly visible, and training manuals teaching the identical procedure, renamed as the Hale Maneuver, with no mention of her contribution. 247 confirmed lives saved using this technique across 4 continents, Elena continued. Field medics teaching it to each other. Emergency rooms adapting it for civilian trauma. All based on innovation that was stripped from my name to hide the circumstances under which it was developed. Senator Booker's expression was granite. Dr. Kemp is present in this hearing. Does he wish to respond? Kemp stood, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. He waved the lawyer off. Senator, Dr. Cross was discharged for insubordination and emotional instability following combat trauma. Her allegations are the product of a disgruntled former service member seeking attention. The procurement process she describes went through multiple levels of approval. My role was purely advisory. Elena felt rage crystallize into cold focus. Then perhaps you can explain these. She clicked to audio files. Hale had kept recordings, conversations that should never have been documented but were, because a general who'd been betrayed once had learned to protect himself. The first recording played through the room's speakers. Kemp's voice, unmistakable. The Cross woman is a liability. Her report implicates our entire procurement chain. We need to neutralize her testimony before it reaches oversight committees. A second voice, Pentagon official. Discharge her. Standard NDA. If she violates it, we destroy her credibility and prosecute. Kemp's voice again. I'll handle it personally. I have contacts at every VA hospital and civilian trauma center. She'll never work in medicine again. The room erupted. Senators demanding order. Pentagon officials on phones. Kemp's lawyer pulling him back into his seat while the man's face went from white to red. Elena sat calmly, watching the system that had tried to erase her, finally forced to acknowledge what it had done. Booker gavelled for silence. Dr. Kemp, you will remain seated. Defense officials, you will surrender all records related to Operation Sandstone and Dr. Cross's discharge within 48 hours or face contempt charges. She turned to Elena. Dr. Cross, this committee thanks you for your courage. We will ensure this testimony reaches the appropriate channels. Within 2 hours, the internal Pentagon stream had been leaked. Within 24 hours, major news networks were running stories about the whistleblower combat medic whose innovations had saved hundreds while she'd been systematically erased. Elena's name, finally, impossibly, was public. 48 hours after Elena's testimony went public, the world shifted. Dr. Gerald Kemp was placed on administrative leave pending federal investigation. His Pentagon consulting contracts were suspended. Riverside Veterans Hospital, facing scrutiny for wrongful termination and conspiracy to silence a whistleblower, announced an independent review of all personnel decisions from the past decade. Elena watched it unfold from a hotel room in Washington, her phone buzzing with interview requests from every major news network. Combat medic turned whistleblower. The nurse who'd been fired for saving lives and then exposed military corruption. Her face was everywhere. News websites, social media, cable television panels debating military accountability and medical innovation. The knock on her door came at 8 a.m. on the third day. Sergeant Reyes stood in the hallway. Dress uniform, expression carefully neutral. Dr. Cross, the Secretary of Defense requests your presence, immediately. This time, Elena wasn't led to a secure briefing room. She was escorted to the Pentagon itself, through corridors lined with portraits of military leaders spanning centuries, into an office that overlooked the Potomac River and contained enough oak furniture to build a battleship. Secretary of Defense Harold Kramer stood as she entered. Early 60s, silver hair, face carved by decades of impossible decisions. Behind him stood Brigadier General Tran, her expression unreadable. Dr. Cross, Kramer said, gesturing to a chair. Thank you for coming. Elena remained standing. Am I under arrest? No, you're here to receive an apology. Kramer's voice carried the weight of institutional authority forced to acknowledge failure. Your testimony exposed systematic corruption that compromised operational security and cost lives. On behalf of the Department of Defense, I apologize for the injustice you suffered. Your discharge was wrongful. Your innovations were stolen. Your service was erased. He opened a wooden box on his desk, revealing a medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, gleaming against blue velvet. We'd like to present this in a televised ceremony, full military honors. Your name restored to all training materials. Recognition for the 247 lives saved using your techniques. Elena stared at the medal. Everything she'd wanted for 7 years. Vindication, recognition, proof that she'd mattered. And now that it was in front of her, she realized it wasn't enough. I don't want the medal, she said quietly. Kramer blinked. I'm sorry? I don't need a medal. I need structural change. Elena stepped closer to the desk, her voice steady and unyielding. 3 things, non-negotiable. First, mandatory whistleblower protections for all military medical personnel. Real protections with independent oversight, not internal review boards that can be manipulated. Tran started to speak, but Kramer raised a hand, silencing her. Second, Elena continued, a public database of life-saving medical techniques with full attribution to original developers. Every innovation, every procedure, every technique that saves lives, documented with the names of the people who created them. No more erasure. Third, an independent review board for combat medical discharges, civilian oversight. Cases like mine reviewed by people outside the chain of command who buried the evidence. The office fell silent. Kramer studied her with eyes that had negotiated treaties and authorized operations that killed thousands. You're asking for systemic reform, he said finally. I'm demanding it. Because if all I get is a medal and an apology, nothing changes. The next whistleblower still gets buried. The next innovator still gets erased. The next soldier still dies from equipment someone approved to save budget. Kramer exchanged a long look with Tran. Then he nodded once. The reforms will be drafted within 90 days, implemented within 6 months. You have my word. Words aren't enough, Elena replied. I want legislation. Senate bill, public record, something you can't bury when the news cycle moves on. A ghost of a smile crossed Kramer's face. Respect for someone who understood exactly how institutions worked. Senator Booker is already drafting it. The Cross-Hale Military Medical Accountability Act. It'll pass. Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. This was real. This was change. Then we have a deal, Mr. Secretary. She left the Pentagon and returned to Fort Ashford, where Hale was being released from medical care. He stood in the recovery room, still weak but upright, Park and Navarro on either side like honor guards. When Hale saw Elena, his face broke into a smile. You did it. You saved more than my life. We did it. Elena corrected. You gave me the evidence. I just made them listen. Hale gripped her hand. You saved me twice, Elena. First in the desert, then by refusing to let them bury the truth. Now go save the system. Make sure no one else has to fight this battle alone. 6 months later, Elena Cross stood in front of a building that didn't exist on any military map. The Cross Institute for Combat Medicine occupied a converted warehouse in Northern Virginia, close enough to Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir to attract military personnel, but civilian enough to remain independent. Funding had come from veteran advocacy groups, private donors, and a surprising number of active-duty soldiers who'd sent small contributions with notes that said simply, "Thank you." The grand opening ceremony drew a crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk, nurses in scrubs, paramedics from inner-city ambulance services, field medics on leave from overseas deployments, journalists with cameras, and standing at the front, using a cane, but upright and smiling, Major General David Hale in his dress uniform. Ladies and gentlemen, Hale said into the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowd. 7 years ago, a combat medic saved my life using a technique that didn't exist in any manual. Today, that technique has saved 247 confirmed lives. Tomorrow, it'll be taught here to the next generation who will save thousands more. I present to you Dr. Elena Cross, the medic who refused to let innovation die in the dark. The applause was thunderous. Elena stepped forward, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. Recognition wasn't about ego. It was about ensuring that future innovators wouldn't be erased. She unlocked the doors. The interior had been transformed. State-of-the-art training stations, surgical simulators, a library of medical protocols with full attribution to their developers. On the wall beside the entrance hung 2 insignias, the Reaper Med Patch and a new emblem showing crossed scalpels over an open book. Dr. Sonia Park and Corpsman Luis Navarro stood inside wearing instructor badges. They'd left active duty to join Elena's mission. Behind them, a dozen other former combat medics who'd faced impossible situations and invented solutions that deserved to be shared. Welcome to the Cross Institute, Elena said to the crowd. This isn't a military facility. It's a place where innovation is documented, not buried, where life-saving techniques are taught with the names of the people who created them, where you learn to trust your instincts when protocols fail. The crowd moved through the facility, and that's when Elena saw her. Margaret Thurlow, the Veterans Affairs Inspector whose life Elena had saved at Riverside Veterans Hospital, stood near the back, fully recovered, her husband beside her. When their eyes met, Thurlow approached with tears streaming down her face. You saved my life, Thurlow said simply, and then you lost your job because of it. I've spent 6 months making sure everyone knows your name. Every VA facility, every oversight committee. You're the reason I'm alive to watch my grandchildren grow up. Elena embraced her, feeling the weight of that choice. Losing her career to save one life suddenly made perfect sense. Later, as the ceremony wound down, Elena retreated to her office. It was small, functional, with a desk and walls waiting to be filled. On the corner of the desk sat a stack of letters, messages from medics worldwide who'd used the Hale Cross protocol. She opened the top envelope. The handwriting was shaky, written in haste. Dr. Cross, I'm a field medic in Jordan. Yesterday, a 19-year-old soldier took shrapnel near his heart. We were 40 minutes from the nearest surgical unit. I used the Hale Cross protocol. He's alive. He's going home to his mother. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I needed you to know. You didn't just save General Hale. You saved this kid. You saved his family. You saved me from living with another death I couldn't prevent. Thank you. Sergeant Marcus Chen. Elena pinned the letter to the wall beside the Reaper Med insignia, the first of what she knew would be hundreds. A knock on the door. Hale stood in the doorway, leaning on his cane. You ready? He asked. Elena nodded. They walked to the main training room, where 30 students, nurses, paramedics, medics, waited with eager, nervous faces. Young people who wanted to be the one who showed up in time, who wanted to trust their hands when the protocols failed. Elena stood at the front of the classroom, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the erasure, the fight, the testimony, the reforms that were now law, and finally this, a place where knowledge could be shared without being stolen. My name is Dr. Elena Cross, she began. 7 years ago, I saved a man's life in a desert field hospital using a technique I invented because conventional medicine had failed. That technique was buried. My name was erased, and I spent years invisible. I'm here to make sure that never happens to you. She paused, looking at faces that reminded her of herself at 26. Brilliant, driven, terrified of failing when it mattered most. You don't need permission to save a life, Elena said, her voice steady and absolute. You just need the courage to act. And when you do, when you invent something that works, we'll make sure the world knows your name. Welcome to the Cross Institute. Let's begin.